What's up, guys? My name is Hanson and welcome to this week's episode of Garage 13. Today I'm actually on my way to Dylan's house to go help him out with the RB25. Also, we're going to be coming out with an update video, the 240 soon, hopefully. So stay tuned on that. So let's go. Alright, so we just got to the house. Let's see who's home. I'm just kidding. We know that Dylan's home. What's up, dude?
What's going on?
Ready to work on the RB25?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
What's up, everyone? So today we're going to be putting the head back on the engine block. So I'll be completing the install of the ARP head studs. Before I do that, I'll be cleaning up the rest of the head gasket and putting the oil pan back on. And then I'm also going to be replacing gaskets on the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold. So let's get started. So in a previous episode, I already replaced the cam seals. If you want to check that out, we'll put a link below. And right now I'm just going to put the rear timing cover back on and the two cam gears. So the first thing you do is just put the rear timing cover back on before you put the cam gears back on. It's just 4 bolts and the head size is 10 millimeter. Alright, so we're all done with the rear timing cover install. So now we're going to move on to installing the cam gears back. And when you do that, you're going to need a big spanner wrench or adjustable wrench like this to hold your cam gear in place. So you either want somebody holding that or you can do it yourself. But you don't want the cam gear to move because it'll change the position of the cam. If you don't have one of these adjustable wrenches, you can use a 24 millimeter. And it'll just slide right on like that. So this is the intake cam, and each cam has a little space or a groove for the knock pin to slide into place, so it can only go one direction. And you just want to line it up with this pin right here, and it should just slide right on. Show this view. Alright, if you're unsure if it's not aligned correctly, there's a little divot on the cam gear itself, and it'll line up with the mark on the rear timing cover. So on the intake side, there's this bolt. The head size is 19 millimeter, and you're just going to slide this in, and when installing it, you're going to have to make sure that the cam gear does not move. And the full service manual does not state a torque spec for this, so I have no idea. So this is where you're going to want to make sure that the cam gear does not move, and just do a little bit. But you can always move it slightly back. And I just got my breaker bar to get a little bit more leverage. Just let it click a little bit. Alright, I think that's nice and tight. Now this has a spring-loaded cover and it has a seal right here because oil does flow through this bolt right here. So you're going to want to make sure this seal is good, otherwise it will leak out of this location. And it just slides right over the bolt head, and it'll probably line up so it says Nissan facing up. And it has these tiny bolts, they're Phillips head, but I think it's also a 6mm head. And you have to use a good amount of pressure to get it on there. That spring is pretty strong. And these are small bolts, so you don't really have to torque them down that much because they will break if you over torque them. Alright, now that we're all done with the intake side, let's go ahead and move on to the exhaust side. And same as on the intake side, it also has a spot for the knock pin to slide onto so you don't get it lined up wrong. And this one's a lot easier because it's doesn't have the variable valve stuff. Slide it on right there, and then just double check your mark, your dimple on the gear to make sure it lines up to the mark on the rear timing cover. There we go. And this one has a little cover and 4 bolts. This head size is 10mm, I believe. So I was wrong about the head size. It's actually 11mm, not 10. And I almost forgot, you also want to get that spanner wrench on the cam gear as well so it doesn't move. You want to make sure the cam gear is lined up. So we're going to install the variable valve intake solenoid, and I just need to rotate the head because it's on the other side. And I'm going to have my buddy over here, Kevin, help me out. I'm sure you've seen him before, owner of the IS300.
Former.
What was that?
What was that?
Former.
Alright, let's get started. And just put it on top of that. Alright, so the solenoid just slides right in this hole right here.
That's inappropriate.
And for install, you're just going to need the wrench you used earlier to hold the cam gear in place. And just make sure it's somewhat clean. And I don't think there's a tightening torque spec for this. It'll just stop. Alright, now we're all done with the head, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the engine block. Get started cleaning off the rest of the head gasket and put the oil pan back on before we put the head on. Alright, we're just going to rotate it over so I can get that oil pan back on before we install the head. It just makes it a lot easier because the block's a lot lighter without the head on it. I think that's good enough, right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Alright, let's get that oil pan back on. Alright, so when installing the oil pan, just want to check both surfaces on the oil pan and on the block, just to make sure there's no excess or leftover gasket from when you took it off. I just use a paint scraper And you just want to be sure to be careful on the aluminum surfaces because they will scratch very easily. The iron is a lot tougher. And the gasket I'm using is, this is from the rebuild kit, straight from Nissan, the OEM kit. So it's genuine from Japan, and it comes with the tip. So you just select your bead size, just cut it off. And we'll get started on that right now. So some tubes of the gasket require you to have a caulking gun, but this is just a normal tube, so you can just squeeze it out. And when applying the gasket, you just want to make sure you get good application all the way around the holes, just like on the differential that I did. Pretty much the same thing. You can always spread it out later. Spread it around, just make sure you have a good layer so it comes in contact with the whole side of the pan. And again, you should probably use gloves for this. I'm not sure if it's skin safe. Alright, you don't want to have too much excess or it will squeeze onto the inside of the pan, but just make it pretty even as possible, and it shouldn't be overflowing like that. And you want to cover the holes just so there's no chance of it leaking. It'll be a pain in the ass to do this again. Alright, now we got that gasket on pretty well. Gonna go ahead and slide it right on. Shit. And where the oil pickup is, you have to slide it in this hole right here. Sit down and line it up as best as you can. And you can see I kind of put too much gasket and it's all poking out of the hole, but it's alright. Clean that up real quick. Well, that kind of just made it worse, but it's alright. Also, I read that the red gasket adds horsepower anyway, so it's gonna help me out in the long run. And to line it up properly, you just want to get a bolt on each side, so it's not just sliding all over the place when you're trying to put the bolts in their holes. After that, it should be pretty straightforward. And in the full service manual, there's a specific order you're supposed to use on the bolts, but it's not extremely necessary. Just you don't want to over torque it because these bolts will snap pretty easily. So I'm not going in any specific order, I'm just kind of doing the cross pattern just to be safe. And you don't want to torque it down all the way. We'll do that on the final run. So we're all done installing the oil pan. Just a quick look, you can tell it's pretty beat up. I think it's from being low car and just getting hit down, I guess. I'm not worried about it right now. It doesn't have any holes or leaks, so maybe it's something I replace down in the future when I need a higher oil capacity pan. But for now, this should be good enough. and we're just gonna rotate it back over, get that top of the block cleaned up so we can get the new head gasket on and the head on. So let's get started on that. We're just gonna get this cleaned up real quick so we can get that new head gasket on. The head gasket I'm using is just the OEM version from the rebuild kit, just standard spec. I read online it's not necessary to get a thicker head gasket to increase your compression, so I'm just gonna stick with stock right now since everything else is stock. And let's get to it. So to clean off the old head gasket, when you use a combination of some parts cleaner, carburetor parts cleaner, a rag, and just a razor blade just to scrape off the residue, and that should be good. I don't have the money to get the block resurfaced, so this is as good as it gets for now. When you're doing this, you just want to be careful that you're not getting any particles near the pistons, because if any particles like this gets in between the piston and the wall, it could do some damage. So just be careful when doing this. What I do, I just scrape away from the piston so you're not pushing anything in that direction. So we're pretty much done scraping the head gasket off. For the most part I used a razor blade and some acetone, but to get the rest of the stuff off I used a 220 grit sandpaper. And you just want to be careful not to get too much particles in the cylinders or in these cooling and oil channels. While you're sanding, just get an air gun and spray it out periodically so you don't get anything settled in there. And once you're done with that, you're pretty much going to want to do the same process on the bottom of the head, but without the razor blade, because the razor blade will scrape the metal and cause it to leak. So you're just gonna want to primarily use sandpaper. So this is my head. I got the head gasket sanded off the bottom of the head pretty well. I also took a Scotch-Brite pad and scraped the valves just so we get the buildup off of there. You can use brake cleaner, it helps to get the residue off. And you just want to use a low grit sandpaper so you don't scratch the metal. You really don't want to scratch it because you'll have to get it resurfaced, and that costs a lot of money. So we're putting the head gasket on. There's only one way to put it. They have channels on the block which line up with the gaskets, and it just slides right on. Now let's get the head back onto the block. Alright, we're finally got the head back on the block. It looks pretty good if you ask me. I'm glad that it's finally coming together. It's looking like an engine again. Now that we have this back on, we can complete the install of our ARP head studs. So we're going to get started on that right now. So when installing the ARP head studs, they include an assembly lubricant. It's an alternative to using motor oil. It just offers a more precise torquing specification. So you always want to use this when installing the head studs. And you just want to lubricate the washers on both sides and the threads of the nuts. So I learned from my mistakes. I just try to drop it in there. And there's a little hole back there where it slid in there. So luckily I had a little hook pick to fish it out of there, but I'm also going to use it as my install tool. And you can carefully lay it in there and over the head stud. So, sorry guys, I hate to inform you that I'm a liar. I told you I was going to get the intake and the exhaust manifold installed today, but I'm not. I also thought I was going to get the ARP head studs installed, but I don't have the right sockets. So we're going to have to go ahead and finish that up next week. So tune in then.